Lord, just be with us now as we conduct business and help us to make sound decisions that are right for our district. In your name we pray. Amen.
Yeah.
Mr. Knight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Ms. Temple, did anybody sign up? Okay. All right, at this time, we will open a public hearing to discuss the budget and proposed tax rate for the 2025-2026 fiscal year. Dr. Johnston will be presenting the report.
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
And as we are required to do every year, before we ask the board to adopt a budget, we have to have a public hearing to get feedback from anybody that wants to provide some feedback. So tonight, going to go over the budget development process, actually show you the budget that we're asking you to adopt, talk about property values, and then next steps. So the overall budget supports the commitments, vision, and mission of the Red Oak ISD strategic plan. It's been prepared in accordance with the district policy, and they've been reviewed. The revenues and expenditures have been reviewed and based on data elements available at this time. And some of those could change, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. The development process was shared with the board in January, the calendar of how we were going to do things. We met with all the budget managers, principals, and department heads in February. We gave the campuses and departments their budgets in March and asked them to complete it and identify where they need to spend the funds. And again, pretty much the budgets from last year are the same as this year. But the campus budgets are based on enrollment, so we project what the enrollment would be for next year. And then the department's budgets are pretty much just rolled over from the prior year. So even with the 89th legislative session being over, districts are still waiting for guidance. We heard some late last week, but we're still waiting for all the different components before we can formally have a budget that we want to use for next year. So then because of all this, we've been advised to adopt a budget based on the known values and current formula that you have. So I've modified it slightly a little bit, but it's still, we have more to come for that. Again, it'll probably take some time for TA to provide the final clarification. So the budget amendment will be occurring later. In the preliminary property values for this budget process, we received on April 30th, and initially it was a 19.3% increase over the 2024 certified values. Certified values were received last July, so 19.3% over that. Their final, the CAD, County Appraisal District's estimate final, while they presented the numbers they had at the time, they also did an estimate of what they think they're going to be in July. And so they projected 9.76%. So it went down from 19.3 to 9.76. Again, we did provide a budget update May 12th. A few things have changed since then, like the next item, the tax rate. When I presented in May, I factored in some compression. There was two different compression models being talked about, one in the Senate, one in the House. And what the House's was 3.31 cents. When the final House Bill 2 came out, there was really no reference to that compression. And all the models that were given didn't have that compression in it. But last Thursday, we got from TA a document that showed that 3.31 compression. So instead of it, even though the current budget had the 0.7377 as the M&O tax rate, when we come back in July or August for a final adoption, it'll be 0.7072. which is like a 6.36% increase because of that. And the INS tax rate is staying the same. And again, we'll calculate the final tax rate. We send stuff to TA in July, and they tell us what that final tax rate will be. It probably won't change because we're already at the bottom, the minimum you can have as far as the tax rate. Their revenue assumptions, these are the same as we talked about in May. A slight increase in the ADA, 3% increase in the actual allotment, special allotments, because they are pretty comparable to what we budgeted this year to what finally came out. We budgeted a 3% increase in most of the ADA or special allotments, so we did the same thing for next year. I did increase the basic allotment by the $55, which was approved in House Bill 2, and we increased the school safety allotment to $20 and $33,540 per campus. Last year it was only $10 per ADA and $15,000 per campus. As far as revenues, I'm budgeting tax collections being around 5.1%. And the reason for that is because, again, in November, we're going to have election to increase the homestead exemption from 100,000 to 140,000. So we're going to have to take some of those additional projected increases. So even though the CAD thought it'd be like 9.7%, it's going to be lower than that because you take off 40,000 for each homestead, which is roughly around $500,000 from, or I mean, $5 million on the values. So again, we're also eligible for the fast growth allotment because we're a growing district, that we get additional funds. If over the last 6 years, our enrollment's gone higher than 250 students, which it has. So it's gone up 625 students. So we get additional funding based on 375 students in the formula. It's roughly $390,000, if I'm not mistaken. And again, because we'll be increasing salaries, certainly because of the new Shaw's folks, we get reimbursement from the state for some of our TRS payments. And so therefore that's being increased. Now, the only downside of this revenue component is we're probably going to get less money from the state for Medicaid. It's called SHARS. And back in 2011, well, 2017, an audit was performed on 2011 data, and they basically said that the state was miscalculating how they should be allocating to schools that Medicaid fund. So they started asking money back, and that number's gone down. So I've taken $500,000 out of that revenue a lot because of that. And then because the revenue is going to increase from the state and taxes, slight increase in interest earnings it will have. Now on the expenditure side, at this time, we're not changing or increasing the compensation plans until we know more about all the different components of House Bill 2. There's several different components that haven't really been shared how they're calculating that information. And we added net increase of 4 positions due to student increases, expansion of required instructional programs, adding 25 additional positions due to Shaw Middle School. And again, a slight increase in property liability insurance because we're adding another school as well. Same thing with utility costs because Shaw is going to be opening. And we're going to continue the attendance incentives, which has been very productive for the district to keep employees coming to work every day. So again, that's kind of the background of the budget. Here's the actual budget numbers. Expenditures are $102 million for both the general fund, student nutrition, and debt service fund. The general fund is $79 million. Student nutrition is $4.5 million, and debt service expenditures is $18.2 million. On the general fund side, the main, and this is going to change again because expecting the tax rate to be a little higher than it will be. So the local taxes show an increase of 1.1 million. That's going to go down. When I did the numbers, it actually gave us a little bit more state funding with the lower tax rate because that's something I'll show you in the end about the property value study. So again, about $2.5 million increase in the current general fund revenue. On the expenditure side, the same 2.5 million, with again, the majority of it being in payroll costs. That's where we're adding those individuals. And again, break down by the function. Most of it increase is going to be in the instructional side because that's to educate students. Again, here's a chart showing that over time, you either have wealthy districts or poorer districts. And we're getting over 50% of our funding from the state. So we're not viewed as a wealthy district. Some districts get maybe 70, 80% from tax collections, and we don't. We only get around 39% tax collections. So most of our funding does come from the state, from the foundation school program. And on the expenditure side, 85% of our current budget is on salaries, which is becoming more and more the norm. It used to be around 75 to 80% of your budget is spent on salaries. But over the last several years, that number is going up to, I think the average right now is roughly 85, 86% here in the state of Texas, from what I've been told recently. And on the function side, again, the majority of it is on instruction of students. Around 72% is all the components of the instructional side. And on the fund balance, the pink line there is what the district's fund balance policy has been. The green line is what the state recommends your fund balance to be. And then the maroon lines or bars are what our fund balance is. And our fund balance projected right now is a little over $21 million, which is about 27%. So we're slightly above the 25% that the state recommends you have. Again, the pink line, the district had a 15% for a while, and then we increased it back in 2021 to move it to the 25 to coincide with the state. So we're still above the 25%, but we're not way up there like maybe some districts, or at 30 to 40% of their budget is, or fund balance. So here again, this is a chart I always like, is where a dollar goes. Again, 72 cents of every dollar goes to teaching, transporting, supervising, counseling students. 5% goes to help support that through library materials, training, curriculum development. 13 cents goes towards securing, operating, and maintaining facilities. And only 10 cents goes towards central office kind of expenditures. So from a student nutrition perspective, in the past, we've had them have more expenditures than revenue because the fund balance grew up over back during COVID, the fund balance increased. And there's limitations on what you can have in fund balance. So we're down below that limitation, but at the same time, trying to make sure our fund balance isn't too high for student nutrition. So we're adding about 300,000 more expenditures than what we're projecting for revenue. We'll see how that turns out during the year. And again, from a food service perspective, only 42% is on salaries and benefits, and the rest of it is on the food materials and preparing the food. On the debt service side, we're reducing our fund balance by 1.6 million. And again, the majority of that is trying to pay off debt we're able to do that, as well as with the issuance of the 2025 bonds, then that's going to be more expenditures for us this year, because we're going to make a bond payment in August so we can get some of the homestead exemption, and then we'll have next February as well. So, and again, this shows our fund balance and debt service. We want to always have enough fund balance to make that August payment, and that's roughly around $7 million. So we do have $7.4 million fund balance projected right now for 25-26. So now some additional supporting information that we provide every year. Talk about the different components that make up the budget. On the basic allotment side, this is a chart showing many years of the basic allotment. And again, the last 6 years, it's been at 6160. This year, it's gone up to 6215. And you heard during the legislation session, a lot of people talking about how with CPI going up roughly 22% over the last 6 years, you should have had about $1,340 added. They only added $55. So again, kind of low $1,285 would have been nice to have gotten us back up to that inflation, because all other costs of the districts have been impacted by inflation. So on the student enrollment, our student enrollment has increased over the last few years. It went down briefly during COVID, but it's come back up and it's projected to increase. The current year budget, we budgeted 6635, and we actually had 6692 for the fall snapshot enrollment. And next year projecting it to be 6727, and then go up for the slightly go up over the next few years after that. As far as the average daily attendance, this is important because the average daily attendance drives the funding from the state, and that number has gone up too, although this year it's not as high as we hoped it was going to be. But it was about 93, 94% this year. Our goal is to always get it to 95 or higher, and so that's what we hope will happen next year. On the weighted average daily attendance, this is what the state says: take the total funding from the state and then the portion of the property value study that would be taxes divided by the 6160, and that's what your weighted daily, that's what they're saying, the weighted average daily attendance. So that number has gone up too every year. This last year it was down slightly. Next year it's going to hopefully be roughly around 9,200 as the ADA, or the weighted WADA as they call it. Now the revenue per WADA, it's gone up over the last few years, roughly projecting to be $7,700 per WADA is the funding from the state, as well as that tier 1 property taxes. The taxable values have continued to go up, projecting them to be $4.5 billion this year. So that's going up still. Every year they've gone up. They probably will continue to go up. The estimated tax revenue, again, based on the current numbers, about $31 million in the M&O fund and $14.6 million in the INS fund. We typically project around only 99% collection. So we took a 1% off for delinquent that we don't get. And I have a slide here in a second that shows you what that has been. And so this is kind of what it's been over the last few years. Last few years, we've been closer to 100% collection. In 2024, we weren't, because the state, the over 65 numbers, they didn't provide us the right numbers in July. And so that's why it was less last year. This year, we're hoping to get, we still have the month of June to go. So I hope to get closer to the 99% in the tax collections. In the tax rate history, again, that tax rate has gone down since 2019. It's gone down by, the projected budgeted numbers, it's gone down by 43 cents. But by adding in the 3 additional reduction, the 3 cents, it's going to go down to 46.28 or 39.5% reduction. So it's gone down almost 40% since 2019, which is good for the taxpayers. And here's the tax rate history for both of the maintenance and operation, and then the interest and sinking. And then another chart we show from year to year, and this is last year's because we don't have this year's yet. These are the top 10 taxpayers in our school district. And the biggest one is Compass Data Centers. And that's actually, they have 2 or 3, I think three, maybe 4 data centers. Those are all combined into one. Carbon is number 2. Then we have some other ones, more subdivision kind of things. So about 16% of the property values from the top 10 taxpayers. So now the discussion of property values. Again, went over this in May, but I was just to do it again. There's two different types of property values. There's one that we get from the CAD, the County Appraisal District, which that's what we base our tax collections on. And that's called the local certified property values. Then there's the state certified property values. That's what the comptroller determines. And again, I think their goal is to ensure the equitable distribution of state funding for public schools, because you have over 250 counties in the state, and each of them may have different ways of calculating the property values. So they do some sort of, it's kind of an audit process where they try to equalize everybody statewide. But they only do their study every 2 years. But it is what we have right now. It'd be nice if they got rid of that and took it just to property tax collections, and maybe they'll do that in the next. So again, if you get more local share of tax funding, then you get less state. You've got two districts here, both of them get the same amount of funding. And then the second district B gets less taxes, so they get more state. So this is kind of that seesaw that I do from time to time, showing. And again, the problem with the property value study is typically the state will use whatever is the highest. If the property value study is higher than the total of the local collections, then they use that number. But the problem is you have to base your tax collections on the local CAD number. So the problem is, so if the state says your property value study is higher, they're going to presume you're getting more taxes than you actually are, so that you get less state funding. So districts lose state funding if that property value study is higher. So that's why I always try to keep them as close as possible. And again, here's another chart just showing over time, as the property values increase, you would think the collections would go up. Also, the tax collections go up, and so therefore the state aid might change. The problem with this calculation for us, we're a growing district. So we also get more state funding because our student enrollment is increasing. So it may not be a one-for-one where tax collections going up, state funding goes down. But as you see from 23 to 24, the property values did go up, but our state funding went down because the tax rates went down. So now the next steps, ask later tonight at the regular meeting, ask the board to adopt the 25-26 budget. We'll continue to monitor current year budget to make sure all of our calculations for the 24-25 budget mirror what we thought they were going to be. So, and if they are different, then we might change them before we come back in August and come back and adopt a budget amendment later this summer. I'm presuming August, because we won't get all the tax information till the end of July. So give us some time to come back in August and hopefully have a more robust budget based on all the House Bill 2 information that we're still trying to decipher how it's going to impact us. They're talking about certain different components, like a $45 for some salaries and then $106 per enrollment for fixed costs. So we're trying to figure out what all that's going to end up helping us from a revenue perspective, so we can come back and request some additional salary increases for all of our staff. We can adopt the budget probably August, but if not, maybe September. And that's pretty much it.
Can you mention real quickly about the senior citizen ceiling and possible compression as
Yes.
far as the tax rate? If they have a senior citizen exemption, homestead exemption, then it will not increase.
Yeah, I mean, that's increasing too.
The, as far as the senior citizen, the tax rate will not increase. They're
No, the
locked
tax
in.
rate won't increase, but their value or their exemptions.
Yes, so they could actually pay less,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
And what happened back last year was they forgot, apparently in 2019, they passed where if the tax compression takes place, the tax rates and the values that the over 65 pay really go down. but they did not implement that until last year, so they had a couple year makeup. And so we were getting left, just an example, about $4 million of frozen levy for the homestead exemptions, and last year it went down to $2 million. So they took $2 million away from us because they weren't implemented, they didn't implement it correctly back in 2020, 2021. So yes. So there are probably some over 65 that their taxes are almost gonna go down to maybe zero.
I just got one quick question. As far as that, under the Medicare reimbursement, you know, how far does that go back? How's that? I know it's gonna affect us some, but you know, how far are they trying to reach back on that?
Well, I mean, we had been budgeting around $1 million.
Mhm.
And then this year, we're probably gonna get around 200,000. Next year, what we submitted so far for next year is closer to 500,000. So that's why we went from $1 million down to 500,000 for the budget. So
Okay.
it's just trying to decipher how they really, and again, it's not the district's fault. It's
No.
how the state process, and the fact that they went back, you know, to 2011, impacting us the last couple of years. It's not fair, but that's the way it is.
Okay.
And there are some districts just trying to get away from that process at all and not try to collect the Medicaid reimbursements.
Okay. I was
At this
just
point,
curious.
We're still moving down that path
Okay.
to continue with the Medicaid.
Yeah, like I said, I was just curious, you know, when they make a mistake, you know, how it affects us.
It always does.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, as this is a public hearing, is there anyone in the audience that has a question or comment? If so, raise your hand and we'll call you up to the podium. Okay, looks like there are none.
Thank you.
Thank you.